everyone, Jen here. I'm the founder and executive director of the Muddy Pug Farm and Sanctuary outside of Maple Valley, Washington. We are continuing on with our series of the wonderful book, One Day I Want to Have a Farm Sanctuary, by the team at the Cloven Heart Farm Sanctuary. And we're continuing on in the first chapter, which is an overview of the fantasy of what people think running a sanctuary is like versus the reality. And we have come to the section called If I Were a Rich Woman, LOL, because that's funny because very few of the people who run sanctuaries have a ton of money. And if you have come to this line of work because you have a great love of animals or a can-do attitude, that is great, but it is not nearly as important as having the funds and the money to run the sanctuary in a sustainable way. And so we're going to walk through a couple of really important financial considerations that you should be percolating on if you are thinking about opening a farm sanctuary. And we are first and foremost going to talk about the considerations of the property that you have, because that's going to have a huge impact on the financing of the sanctuary. We're going to talk through the considerations of how much it can cost to run a farm sanctuary. We'll talk about where you get money to fund a farm sanctuary. And last but certainly not least, we'll talk quite a bit about the framework that you develop on how you spend the money associated with your farm sanctuary. So as we talk through all of this, I'm going to weave in our story as a sanctuary and how we came to some of the financial decisions we have arrived at. So first and foremost is you should be cognizant that most sanctuaries do not become financially independent, meaning that their revenue streams outside of their founders or operators are coming in independent of what you might personally pay towards the sanctuary to keep it running. And it usually takes about 5 to 7 years before a sanctuary becomes fully funded from resources outside of its founder or operator. And I am certainly no exception to that. And so I have made a personal decision, like I am a single mom running this sanctuary at this point, and I have a lovely, wonderful, rewarding career that even if I didn't run the sanctuary, I would really have a hard time giving up the insurance. And so I work full-time in the insurance business in a consulting firm, and I love doing that work, and that work helps my super profitable side hustle of having a sanctuary. And so you will need to, as you're thinking about the finances of the sanctuary, just be very realistic that you will likely be the person funding this work for a good length of time. And that brings us to one of the most important points, is where you are going to do the work of your farm sanctuary. So when I was kind of starting in a new role, I had an executive coach who asked me, like, what would you be doing if you weren't selling insurance? Because a little side tip, nobody that works in the insurance business ever aspires to work in the insurance business. We all came from somewhere else. We all aspire to be doing something else. But I said I would have a rescue. And so I worked for 2 years to save the money to buy the property that is the sanctuary. And that is the first sort of strategic decision that you need to come to, is deciding, do I want to buy a property? Does the sanctuary want to buy a property? Because there's different implications around your personal finances versus the sanctuary finances. What does it mean for you personally to take on a mortgage? What does it mean for the sanctuary to try to borrow money for a location? And there are downstream impacts, and we'll get to that when I talk about how what our framework is for how we spend money on the sanctuary, that initial decision of where you locate and how you decide to own the property is a very important factor that's going to have downstream effects that will impact the finances of your sanctuary. So that is one of the first most strategic decisions that you can make as you are thinking about your finances. Now, you will notice that I did not say you need to think about how much you are going to rent a property for or how much you're going to lease a property for. And that is because I, in my personal opinion, would strongly caution you against leasing or renting a property unless you were able to secure a multi-decade land lease. Because we have seen fellow sanctuaries that are forced to close because the actual owners of their properties decide to sell the property, and it turns into just a fire sale crisis situation where the entire sanctuary has to try to secure other property. And it is tremendously difficult when you have just a menagerie of animals in tow to find another rental property, and then you are just at this additional barrier where you might be trying to buy into a property. So I just strongly recommend that you save yourself a significant amount of hassle and do not start a sanctuary unless you own the ground beneath your feet in some capacity. See that?
Cupid, don't you agree?
Cupid agrees 100%. So next we are going to talk a bit about oh my god, I completely lost my train of thought.
Cupid, what was the next point? Tell Mama.
What were we going to talk about? Oh, so our next point is to talk about how do you estimate how much running a sanctuary is going to cost you. And this is a place where it will be a function of the kind of property that you have, the kind of animals that you are hoping to house on your sanctuary, and really what the current infrastructure of the sanctuary looks like. And so within Washington and perhaps in other locations in the US or even abroad, in Washington, we have the good fortune of every county has what's called a conservation district. And I want to give many thanks and so much gratitude to the King County Conservation District, especially to our farm planner, Jay Miro, who has been an invaluable resource, a wonderful planning partner in this journey. And what Jay and the team at the King County Conservation District did was they came onto our farm early on before we started really bringing on residents, and they did a survey of the soils. They surveyed the riparian areas, the wetland areas. Someone came in and looked at the forest that's on our property, and they looked at the pasture areas and where everything was fenced in and what could potentially house residents. And based on that, they were able to estimate the carrying capacity of the sanctuary based on what the available pasture and forage was, as well as how many animals the sanctuary could sustain from a waste standpoint. And the way that gets measured is usually in terms of animal units. And so if you look at Cupid, a very large cow, he is one animal unit. When we look at our goats and our sheep, those are generally considered to be a third of an animal unit. And so while it is not to say that you cannot have more animals than the defined carrying capacity based on your pasture and waste considerations, you should be aware from a financial planning standpoint that if you exceed the carrying capacity of your sanctuary and the available forage, you are going to have to spend money on hay, and eventually you will have to spend money on manure removal, waste removal on your sanctuary. So what does that mean? For us, we have a total of 50 residents. About half of those residents are large ruminants. We have cows, goats, sheep, and then about half of our residents are smaller animals, the buns, our hens, Shanti, our rooster, and the drakes. And so when we are purchasing hay, we purchase hay in bulk. It is the most cost-efficient way for us to purchase hay. We buy 14 tons at a clip because that's the most a hay truck can carry. And while it is an incredible investment each time we make a hay purchase, the per bale and per tonnage cost is significantly more cost effective than if we were to buy in smaller shipments like a ton or 2 tons. And so for our sanctuary, to keep our residents in wonderful hay, thank you Badger Hay, it costs us $7,500 for 14 tons of hay. And we are very careful with our hay consumption, and so our hay order lasts us anywhere between 4.5 to 5 months. And so we're spending a good $17,000 to $20,000 on hay just right off the gate. We also have to spend money on feed. So we buy grain for our older goats to keep their weight up. We buy all sorts of feed for our chickens, scratch feed, cracked corn, pellets, mealworms, and we also share some of that with our drakes. We also buy special Treatos for everyone. So we'll pick up produce from time to time for everyone. And that is just to keep everybody fed. Yes, Manny, I know. Dinner's late. Dinner's late. They don't like it when the waitress is sitting here talking. The other consideration in terms of what it costs to run a sanctuary is also medical care. And so sometimes you will have great years in terms of medical care. And for us, a great year of medical care or just like body care for our residents might mean that we are purchasing supplies like lice control, mite control. We might keep antibiotics on stock. We keep all of the different like B complex, iron supplements. We keep loose minerals. We also keep joint biscuits for people. So there is just a lot that goes into maintaining the overall preventive health of residents. In addition to, we do not do our own farrier work. So it costs about $200 a month for our farrier to come in, costs $200 every 6 months for our cow farriers to come in. A huge shout out to Jillian and Thompson Livestock Services for their farrier services on the sanctuary. But hopefully you get a sense that like even in healthy times, the an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. But we spend easily a good $4,000 to $5,000 on different supplements, preventive medications, farriers coming in to just maintain a base level of good health for our residents. And you also have to prepare for medical care and more emergent or urgent medical care. I'm not gonna lie, it costs a small fortune. And so, we had our situation where Chris had to have a surgery that was over $750 to $1,000. When we had residents especially who are subjected to abuse or neglect, they have significant care requirements. So for example, when we brought in Abby, Rose, and Felice from a neglect situation on a homestead, that care easily cost about $10,000 last year. So, I would just have a very cautious approach as you think about scaling your sanctuary. And it's not only scaling your sanctuary to make sure that you can financially provide for the animals that you have, but you also want to be very responsible in terms of the types of residents that you're bringing in. And I know that there is a lot of debate in the sanctuary community about emergency fundraising or emergency fundraising to rescue specific animals. And I would just say that while even I struggle with emergency fundraising, such as, seeing a rescue or sanctuary say, unless we raise $2,000, we are not bringing this resident and saving their life, I will also say that that is a very responsible approach to not bring on a resident unless you have the funding for your care, because then you are dipping into funding for other residents, you're dipping into funding for necessary expenses, and I cannot overstate how difficult financial stress is when it is layered over everything else that you deal with in terms of running a sanctuary. So as you think about, the different buckets of expenses, the other expense that you will want to think about is just maintaining the basic infrastructure of the sanctuary. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but you will want to come to a strategic decision about how you use the funds, especially if you personally own the property that the sanctuary is on. And so, all things being equal, you will spend money on structural maintenance, whether it's fencing, whether it's gravel, whether it's mulch, whether it's electric tape, and other types of systems to keep your residents safe, dry, and sheltered and contained in the areas that they are supposed to be in. And so, especially if you are coming into a property that does not have that infrastructure, I would just forewarn you that, building materials, fencing materials are extraordinarily expensive. At this point in time, we are in March of 2024. And so you will want to take a stroll through your local lumber store, hardware store, to get a sense of, what kind of projects you might need to undertake to get your sanctuary to a point that it can accept residents, and have a solid estimate of not just what it costs to initially put that infrastructure down, but you should also prepare, when you have especially cows, but you should also prepare for what that second repair looks like. Maybe even what that third repair looks like, because residents do have a lot of wear and tear, especially larger residents, on the infrastructure of the sanctuary. So in terms of other tools that are available to estimate the costs associated with your residents, I also want to give a huge shout out to Z and the team at the Open Sanctuary Project, who has recently rolled out a lifetime care cost estimator, where you can use this tool to estimate by species what the costs are. So the only caveat I would say to that is, again, just being mindful about the type of property that you have and how much forage you may or may not need supplied will also impact your overall lifetime costs to care for a resident. So the third area for us to focus on is, okay, I'm opening a sanctuary, where do I get money to fund my sanctuary? And before you begin actively fundraising, I cannot recommend, request, shamelessly beg that you file for your 501c3 status. On behalf of the many other sanctuaries that are in our community, when you are a registered 501c3 nonprofit, you are sort of on and above board with, in the US, with the Internal Revenue Service. You also can register as in Washington at least, as a public benefit corporation, and that will also help lend a level of legitimacy and transparency and oversight. In addition, you can also, or you should also, work with your local regulatory bodies if you are in a jurisdiction that requires other additional certifications and fees. For example, our friends in Oregon are required to pay extensive fees to have a rescue or a sanctuary, and you'll want to make sure that you are on the up and up, that you have the required oversight, you've filed all of the necessary documents, and you've paid paid the necessary fees, because unfortunately, when there are sanctuaries that are operating on a for-profit basis, it truly gives the impression that sanctuaries just exist to profit off of animals who are already suffering, which is not the point of any of our work. But when you have kind of bad actors in the sanctuary community, they make it extraordinarily difficult for the sanctuaries who truly try to operate as an above-board nonprofit. And I will give you an example as a cautionary tale. So some of you might know that we are working on opening a second sanctuary over on the Big Island, and there was a sanctuary that operated on the Big Island for a few years and would always post on their Instagram and their website that they had filed for their nonprofit status. And that's sort of like, we're waiting for our nonprofit status, you know, as soon as we get it, your donations will be tax deductible. That happened over a period of 2 years. And like, speaking from my own experience, it took the IRS, you know, about 45 days to approve our nonprofit application. So it really does not take as long as it was purported to be taking for this for-profit sanctuary. They had a very challenging financial situation, but they would continue to solicit donations through social media and other channels. And at one point, about 4 to 6 months ago, they went onto social media and said that their founder was having a major financial emergency and that they were $40,000 in debt. But I think what people don't realize is that if you are not a registered nonprofit, if you don't have an operating board, you are a business. And a for-profit sanctuary is in the business of getting money for the people that operate the sanctuary. And in that fundraising push, they raised over $18,000. And then within an additional 3 months, the sanctuary just closed immediately due to an emergency in that family. And who knows what happened to that funding, where it went. The animals are currently being rehomed to sanctuaries and private caregivers around the Big Island. But you can get the sense that when you are not operating on the up and up, and when you are not a nonprofit that is registered with an active board, you can see how those like huge emergency fundraising calls can create this level of uncertainty about the legitimacy of a sanctuary's operations. And so when you think about revenue streams, sanctuaries get money from all sorts of places. You may have private donors, you may have people that engage with you and donate through social media. A lot of sanctuaries offer Patreon, which they provide exclusive content to regular donors. If you have other types of programs within your sanctuary, either for animal care or even beyond that, like education programs, you also might be eligible for grants. But my kind and another piece of very strong advice is you should not count on a single dollar of consistent fundraising for the first, easily 4 to 5 years that your sanctuary is in existence. And if you have the amazing fortune of really just being able to run your sanctuary full time, that will give you plenty of bandwidth to do the work that might be needed on social media to raise awareness or to apply for grants. But if you are balancing like multiple jobs, if you're running your sanctuary by yourself, you should be prepared that it can be very difficult to tap into a consistent level of fundraising. And this is where we also see people kind of get really over their skis, because at least what I have observed and even in our own experience, when there are urgent calls for fundraising to rescue an animal, to provide it with emergency medical care, to do a large rescue of multiple animals, we do see significant amounts of fundraising happen. And that is a way that people can get over their skis incredibly quickly, because it is a odd sort of incentivizing system that when you are constantly, like, I've seen sanctuaries just put out emergency call after emergency call, like our pasture's flooded, our fencing's broken, a shelter's down, a resident's really injured, we want to rescue new residents. And it's just like every week there's a new emergency call. When your emergency fundraising is tied to the intake of resident after resident after resident, you are going to grow your sanctuary beyond your capacity to sustain it, and that can create a ton of problems. And so, when we see people in the sanctuary community get over their skis financially, it is an incredible stressor. People do all kinds of things to fundraise, and this is the last part of the conversation of like, where does your funding come from? Is if you have a well-functioning board that provides oversight to the sanctuary, your board will hold you accountable, and you should hold yourself accountable to do fundraising and activities in a way that is consistent with your mission, which is consistent with sanctuary work. And so, like, we see people out in the sanctuary community that do porn as a way to fund their sanctuaries. We see more than a few sanctuary operators that have OnlyFans site, and it is problematic. Like, it is a controversial topic within the sanctuary community to do things that are generally viewed as exploitative in nature. Like, if you are pro pornography, awesome for you. If you are pro OnlyFans, awesome for you. In addition to me being like a 50-year-old mom of teenagers, and I just went anyways. Actually, I'm going to start a fundraising where like people just pay me to put my clothes back on. That's the kind of fundraising that I would do. But I would just really encourage you to think carefully about the carrying capacity and your personal finances and how that all works together with the financing of the sanctuary, so that you are not put in a position where you have to put yourself in a compromised or unhealthy or an exploitative sort of line of work or platform that really, rubs against the grain of what it means to be a sanctuary. Like, I can speak for our mission. Like, we strive to be a sanctuary for people and animals. And for us, like, engaging in a platform like OnlyFans, which is tied to things like human trafficking, like, that's not what we're about. And so, like, we have made a decision, in addition to me being a 50-year-old mom of two, we have made a strategic decision that we would never engage in that kind of activity. And like, there are other sanctuaries that have different perspectives on that, and that's totally fine. But you should make, if you want to do that, just make an intentional decision to do that. Like, don't do it because you're desperate and you're over your skis and you don't have enough funds. Like, own it, and step out in fundraising in that way. We're gonna move inside because it's getting dark. Okay, this is way better. I can actually, see everybody now. So we talked a little bit about the location of your sanctuary and how that influences your cost. We talked about how to estimate the costs associated with your sanctuary. We talked a bit about how you get money into your sanctuary and some considerations around like fundraising in a way that is consistent with your mission. So the last area to talk about is, how do you think about how you spend money as a sanctuary and what you decide to spend money on? And this is a place where it is so important to have, a good functional framework in each of these areas, but especially in the area of how you spend money and where you focus. And some of the things that I am going to touch on are like hotly debated topics in the sanctuary community. And I will offer our perspective, and I will say, like, we are not the be all and end all of these perspectives, but these are just decisions that we have made based on discussions that we've had internally and how we have decided to operate the Muddy Pug. So one of the things that you need to think about, and it's sort of in no particular order, is the philosophical discussion, especially if you own the property that you operate your sanctuary on, and it is not like your property is not owned by the sanctuary. You need to think about how you are going to spend money on infrastructure projects that are going to be permanent fixtures in the sanctuary. And what do I mean by that? So when I look through the sanctuary here, we have spent money on fencing, gates. We have spent money on structures like infrastructure and building shelters, the whole sheep and dwarves area, for example. We have 2 shelters there. In senior living, we have built a new shelter. And while those aren't like permanent fixtures on the sanctuary, if something crazy should happen and the farm is sold, having additional fencing, having a barn that's been retrofitted, having additional structures, even, like the care and maintenance of the driveway, are all things that adds value to the property that I personally own. And with that in mind, we have made the decision that when we are spending money on anything that we would consider infrastructure to the farm, that is something that we will never, ever, ever, ever use donations for. We strongly feel that because this is a property that I own, and if I would ever sell the farm, that I would benefit from the increase in value and improvements to the property. I do not think it's appropriate to use donations for that. So like our North Star, when we think about donations and where those get directed, we direct those to resident care only. And resident care means hay, it means feed, it means medical care and preventive care. And that's really it. We don't use donations from others, people that are donating into the sanctuary for those kinds of expenses. And so that is something that you and your board, or as a leadership team, if you're a larger sanctuary, like you will want to get religion about like what is our framework in how we decide to spend our dollars. You will also want to come to a solid decision, even on things like buying tools for the sanctuary, how do you manage vehicles for the sanctuary. So these are all like decision points where you can decide to use donations, you can decide to accept in-kind donations, but it will help you because running a sanctuary is a crazy mental load in the day-to-day, but it will really help your overall mental load if, rather than like taking every single decision as it comes and like grinding through that decision-making process, if your organization is just aligned on what the framework is for how you make these decisions, dude, the decisions become super easy. So like, invest the time up front in like figuring out who you are, figuring out your mission, what are your values, how do you make decisions, and how are those decisions an expression of your values and how you operate as a sanctuary. It will make the day-to-day so much easier because you will be in alignment, as we say in my day job. You'll be in alignment with what it is you're about. So save yourself some mental load. I am going to talk about a super controversial topic in the sanctuary community. And the next part of this discussion is to talk about how money might be spent to bring residents into your rescue or into your sanctuary. And so I just want to say that this is a topic that is like a hot potato in the rescue and sanctuary community. And there is a wide spectrum of views, and we are going to talk about like the polar ends of the spectrum, but there is a continuum of thinking in the spectrum. And then I will talk about our own journey in how we think about this topic. So when you are doing farm animal rescue, there are multiple ways that residents come into the sanctuary. You may have residents come in from other rescues or sanctuaries. You may have residents you might receive from like your local county shelters. You may have rescues that are private surrenders. And there is very little controversy about those three paths for residents. This last one is a doozy. There is a tremendous amount of debate and really passionate feelings about pulling residents from slaughter auctions or getting residents from meat brokers. And so for those of you who might not be familiar with like how farm animals get moved around in private sales, there are slaughter auctions all around the country. We have a slaughter auction in South King County every single Saturday, and hundreds of animals, horses, cows, pigs, goats, sheep, ducks, bunnies, chickens, quail. If it is a farm animal, it will move through the slaughter auction. And these are fucking hellholes of sick, terrified, just the saddest cases of farm animal abuse and neglect passes through slaughter auctions. And on one end of the spectrum of this sort of debate are people who feel like these animals are the most critically and in imminent danger of being sick, of being abused, of being neglected, of facing certain death if they are picked up at a slaughter auction. And we are going to direct our resources, we are going to use donations to pull these animals that are in imminent danger out of harm's way, and we are going to expend our resources to save them from the slaughter auction. We are going to help to, recover their health, give them the care that they need, and we may hang on to them in our sanctuary or we may adopt them out. And a lot of times, if it's a rescue, they will charge an adoption fee, which replenishes their funds. And adoption fees can, generally range as low as like $50 to as high as $250 per animal. At the other end of the spectrum are people who view meat brokers or people who are like taking animals from farmers, and they might be serving as a middleman to bring that animal to a slaughter auction. There are people who feel like if you engage in the meat broker and slaughter auction system, then you are giving donation money from people who are hoping that they are helping animals, and you are giving that money and putting it into a system that perpetuates the very abuse and neglect and killing of animals that we are all here, that we are all against I'll put an asterisk on that. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But for the most part, we are against the killing, neglect, abuse of farmed animals, all animals. And if you are a rescue that participates and gives money into that system, then that is just like a huge example of a cognitive dissonance where you are not living in your actual values. And we as a sanctuary have had our own journey in this space. So when we brought our first residents in, we worked in partnership with a very well-known rescue who did charge an adoption fee. And I will say, like, I was completely ignorant at the time as to, where certain rescues get their residents. And this is a rescue that participates in pooling their residents from meat brokers, and they will take in animals from other places, like sometimes private surrender, sometimes we'll pull in retired dairy animals. But I have definitely struggled knowing that, I personally paid the adoption fee, so it's not like we used sanctuary resources, but I did struggle knowing that I was giving money that could be directed through the rescue to rescue other animals, and money would be given to meat brokers that just kind of perpetuate that system. As we have grown and matured as a sanctuary, there have been 3 cases out of the 50 or so residents that we have where we have paid money to directly intervene in a resident's life to bring them to the sanctuary. So a first example of that was Finn and Nick, and we received a call from a neighboring horse rescue that had spotted 4 baby goats that were dumped at the slaughter auction who looked like they were in terrible shape. And I had never been to the slaughter auction in our neck of the woods. And so we went down there, and it was like, if you are an animal lover, there is no place more terrible than the slaughter auction. Like, being in a slaughterhouse would only be slightly worse than being at the slaughter auction, and seeing how just abjectly terrified, how sick, like if you know animal husbandry and you see the animals at a slaughter auction, they are in just terrible shape. They're dehydrated. You can tell they haven't had access to food. They're covered in their own waste. And when we participated in the auction, you are there like bidding on the animals, and somebody's like smacking them to get them to move around the ring to show people that they're healthy enough to buy. It is so just flat out up that people participate in this. And I'm sure there are people who are going to say like, oh, farmers, fuel the food system. Like, is such the way that animals are treated in our food system, and especially in slaughter auctions. And so when you were there, you're like, man, if I had $1 million, I'd pull every animal out of this place. And then you realize that this happens every single Saturday. This happens every week in every rural community in the country. Animals move through this system. And it's just a shameless plug for veganism, because sanctuaries can't save them all. The only way it stops is if you people stop eating animal products. Sidebar. So we did pay money. We paid about $200 to pull Finn and Nick out of that situation. And you know what? I'd pay that $200 again, because when I looked at Finn and Nick when they first came out of the auction, and then I see the way that they are now, like 100% worth it. And it feels really icky knowing that those at the slaughter auction, like got their cut, that the meat broker got his cut or her cut. And I look and Finn and Nick, they were so worth saving. They were absolutely worth saving. And we, just a month or so after that, we had the same situation with C-Store, who is clearly a pet bunny. Like, she is a Holland Lop. She is bred to be loved and snuggled and cuddled. And somehow some dumped her at the slaughter auction, where she sat in a cardboard box for 2 days and no food and water, and we pulled her out of there for $7. And like, who knows what would have happened to her? People pick up bunnies and small animals from the slaughter auction to use as bait for dog fighting. And again, like, when I see C-Store now and I see her like hopping around, or I see her lounging in the bun area, $7 was so worth it. It was so worth it to save her. Now, the last time that I paid for a resident, I actually paid for 2 residents, and this is like one of the tougher things to talk about, and I am going to be showing some sensitive pictures, so just be aware. I will try to flag it to you before I show them, but so we did pay to get Chris and Buddy out of the situation that they were in. This is something that I'm going to try to talk about this as delicately as possible, but I also want to be as transparent and honest as possible. So within the sanctuary community, especially in the Pacific Northwest, like, we all talk amongst ourselves. And there was a conversation brewing about a petting zoo that is in Issaquah, and it's called the Cuteness Attack Farm. And there was a conversation that the owner and the proprietor of the Cuteness Attack Farm was allegedly breeding a bunch of animals, especially bunnies. And the Cuteness Attack Farm has an Airbnb experience where people can pay money to like come in, and the kids can hold like newborn baby bunnies, which is so not okay for the bunnies, but when you want to make a buck, I bet it's okay. So they were doing things like that. They had goats and chickens, a mess of chickens around. But the first flag to the sanctuary community was that there was a goat, who is Chris, who was wandering off of that property because it wasn't appropriately fenced. And there was a lot of conversation about like, what's going on there? How are the animals being bred? Are they being treated well? And then the owner and proprietor posted pictures to social media about not just what she does during the day with her Airbnb experiences, but she posted that she had allowed people to come on to her farm, and that they took a goat that looked just like Chris. I don't know if it was like Chris's companion or where they came from, but that goat in social media pictures had like a chain wrapped around its head so that its head was pulled down to the ground. The people who she let onto her property shot the goat with a bolt gun, and then she posted about how they brought knives and torches and blow torches, and they show, she had a picture of the goat blow torched on a pallet. And so, letting people come onto the property, letting people kill animals, and then I don't know how you want to define using knives and blow torches, but I think that's like mutilating a poor animal who did not deserve to be treated like that. And as those pictures and conversations circulated through the sanctuary community, people started reaching out to the owner of the Cuteness Attack Farm to try to get her to surrender some of her animals to sanctuaries. And she was having none of that. So I reached out to her through Facebook Messenger, and I asked her if she would consider selling her white goat, which was Chris. And she did not want to give that goat to a sanctuary. She said that she was getting contacted by all sorts of activists, and she would only release the goat if the goat was going to be killed. And she asked me if I would, I'm trying to think of how she put it, if I would do my own slaughtering of the animal. And in these types of situations, I don't want to lie. And I really just want her to give me goat so she doesn't do anything more terrible. And so I just told her that I do not slaughter the animals that I have myself, which is true. So she not only agreed to sell me Chris, but she also let me know that she had a 7-month-old proven buck, which means that Buddy had already been mated, and that she would let them both go for $1,000. And you might be like pausing this video and telling me that I'm just a crazy hooker for paying $1,000 to save 2 goats for a variety of reasons. But I am telling you, like, if I went to bed at night that night knowing that I did not intervene when I could have to get Chris and Buddy out of there, do I feel horrible knowing that I gave that $1,000 of my personal money to get Chris and Buddy out of there? Absolutely, because you know, and I know that she is just turning around and getting more animals, or she's bringing more people who are like, oh my God, it's so great to be in a petting zoo. Like, you know that you are just perpetuating that business and what happens on that property when you give her money, and that makes me insane. And I cannot look at Chris and Buddy and think about not helping them. So I can understand when you look at the individual residents and you think of what would have happened to them and what their life would have been like if you had not intervened and paid for them. And I understand just the utter revulsion that you feel towards this system and the people that operate and profit in this system. And I can absolutely understand that you would be loath to give a penny to perpetuate that system. So I don't know that there's a right answer, but what I would recommend is just like to go back to you as a sanctuary, you as a board, you as a leadership team, and really like create your framework and draw a line in the sand about what you believe, what you do, why you do it, so that you are abundantly clear within yourself as an organization, like how you are arriving at these decisions and how you are orienting yourself sort of within this whole spectrum of decision and choices about like how you get money, where you get money from, how you spend your money, so that you can feel good in you that you are doing things that are in line with your values. As a sanctuary, after Chris and Buddy, no way. We don't pay anymore for residents. And that situation was so incredibly terrible that I cannot bring myself, even if it was from a reasonable situation, I could not bring myself to pay for another resident. That's just something that we will never, ever do again as an organization. So you can see if you... 40 minutes later, you could see when you're reading this book that this little section is only 3 pages, But I hope that in this very long conversation that you can realize, and it's really for any organization, like how you get money, how you think about money as an organization, the things that you have to do or engage in order to generate revenue for your organization, and then where you spend your dollars says so much about who you are, about what you're about what you value. And I would just strongly encourage you, like, this is not an area where you want to wing it. This is not an area where you want to see how it goes, or that you want to scale quickly and hope that things catch up with you. There are many places in the work of a sanctuary to like really slow down your role and really be thoughtful and intentional about what you do and why you do it. If you cannot do it here, you should not do it anywhere. This is the most important place for you to invest that time and really think about all of those things. Whew! That was a lot to cover. I want to give a huge shout out to everybody that supports us financially. We have people who are regular donors to the Muddy Pug. We have people who intervene and who assist us with emergency vet bills. We have people who assist us with specific residence and sponsorship. And we have several granting organizations that we work with. I cannot tell you, as someone who spends the majority of the money to fund the sanctuary, like how every single dollar that is given to us for the care of our residents is so incredibly appreciated and meaningful. We so appreciate your support and the support of this work. We will look forward to seeing you in the next discussion. I swear to the baby Jesus, it will not be as long as this one. With so much love from the Muddy Pug.
I know where you are, and I'm coming to carry you home.